In today's session, we will be learning more about Tonic's 100% portfolio approach to investing with impact. A few housekeeping announcements before we begin the main program. I will be ensuring that your learning experience with us this morning, afternoon, evening is a meaningful one. If you're finding that my webcam video is facing a lag, please pause the video by hovering over my face or any of the participants' face to reduce your internet bandwidth. If you're facing any other technical challenges, such as difficulties in hearing the speakers, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We will strive to address your query as soon as we can. We will be commencing shortly, but before we kick off our session, I'd like to highlight a few features of this room to keep our conversations lively. Please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recording from conference.avpn.asia. If you have any questions for your speakers in relation to the session, we will be holding a 15-minute Q&A at the end, so do stay with us till the end. Feel free to type up your questions in the Q&A pod and we will convey those questions to our speakers. Due to time constraints, the speakers will not be able to respond to all your questions. Throughout the session, there will be interactive activities for you to participate in. If you take a look at the bottom of the screen, we've also provided you with reading materials that you can download or refer to. Finally, to continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates in this session, please make full use of the AVPN connector. The link can be found in the resource section. And with that, I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Cindy Ko. Cindy currently serves as Tonic's Asia representative, deepening the organization's presence in the region. Cindy is passionate about social impact and has served on the advisory board of Asian Venture Philanthropy Network and the investment committee for Patama Capital's Investing in Women Fund. Cindy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Komal, and thank you everyone for joining us for the last session of the last week. As Komal mentioned, my name is Cindy Ko. I head up Tonic for here in the APAC region. Before we dive into the session, I'd love to give a brief background on what Tonic is for those of you who don't know, and what we mean by investing with 100% impact. So Tonic is a global community of high net worth individuals, family offices, and foundations who actively seek deeper impact in their investments and their lives. We have 400 members from over 25 countries. It was founded in 2010 in the US, but as you can see, it's a movement that's spread across the globe. And Tonic members are those who seek to align their values, who seek to align all of their financial investments and all other aspects of their lives with their values. This is particularly true for members of the 100% network, a subgroup within Tonic whose members are committed to moving 100% of their investable wealth towards deeper positive impact. Now, both of our panelists today, Doug Lee and Annie Chen, are members of the 100% network. Tonic conducted a study involving 83 impact investors from this 100% network. This represented $6 billion in assets. And we basically asked the question, what does a portfolio invested for 100% impact look like? And as you can see from here, on the surface of things, it doesn't look very different from a regular portfolio. You have public equities leading at 26%, fixed income and private equity at 21% each. But if you scratch a little bit deeper in the surface, what actually this shows is that investors who seek to align their investments with their values are able to find impact deals in all asset classes. In terms of investment themes, the study we conducted found that the 100% impact members invested across all different impact themes. That's no surprise. But what was interesting was that among the top 3 most popular themes, SDG number 17, Partnership for Goals, was among them. And so what that means, partnerships for the goals, is that it's basically a way for people to mobilize capital and resources towards actually fulfilling other concrete goals. So basically what this shows is that people who invest with 100% impact in mind are more likely to be ecosystem builders. Now, what about financial returns? We asked that question to our study participants. Do you believe that impact investments yield lower or higher financial returns compared to traditional investments? And what might be a little bit surprising was actually that over the long term, there was a slightly higher expectation of financial returns from impact investments. In the short term, it was slightly lower, but in the long term, you can see there, 62% expected the same returns for impact investments as traditional investments, but 38% actually expected higher. What might be even more surprising is, given those higher expectations, on average, 82% of the study participants found that their impact investments met or exceeded their financial objectives. You can see from here that the responses are different among basically different types of entities, whether you're an individual or a family office, but still across the board, the impact investments performed well for them. And we looked at the profile of who is committing 100% of their portfolio to impact, and it was fairly evenly split between those that had been investing in the impact space for over 10 years, and the group that had invested between 5 and 10 years, and then the newbies that had been in the impact investing space for less than 5 years. So the conclusion from that is actually that there's a growing interest in the impact investing field. There are more and more newcomers coming. And for those that are just getting started in their impact journey, you'll be amongst a good crowd of learners, as well as being supported by people who have a lot of experience in the impact investing space. And with that, we would love to learn a little bit more about where you all are in your impact investing journey. So my colleague Chen will just launch a short poll for us to take a look at that. Great, thank you. I think we'll be closing the poll in a few seconds. It looks like climate, gender, and sustainable supply chains are among the top themes that are of most interest to this group now. And it looks like many of you are early in your impact journey. You mentioned a lack of knowledge as one of the biggest barriers to becoming an impact investor. Great, thank you for that. This is helpful information for our panelists as we get started. Great, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers for this session. Annie Chen is the founder and chair of RS Group. She's a familiar face on the impact investing circuit because she's been a pioneer in the field in Asia when she got started on her impact investing journey over 10 years ago. The RS Group published a groundbreaking impact report in 2016 that was a call to action to all investors, especially family offices. The impact report shares the RS Group's philosophy to both investing and philanthropy, and shares very freely their financial and impact results. You can find the report on their website. Annie will share with you today around the total portfolio approach she takes to impact investing, from public to private equities, and even to cash. Our second speaker today, from Seoul, we have Doug Lee, who's the co-founder and partner of D3 Jubilee Partners. D3 Jubilee is an impact-focused venture capital fund with backing from the Korean government. Doug is a successful entrepreneur with experience running businesses in both Korea and Silicon Valley. His firm looks for startups around the world that provide solutions to social and environmental issues. D3 Jubilee invests across a range of sectors, including education, healthcare, the environment, and energy. Doug will share with you today on how he is using his VC fund to shape certain industries. So for the benefit of those who may not know either of you, could both of you basically introduce yourselves by answering these three kind of main questions. The first is around how you got started in your impact journey. If you can mention whether there were events, people, or values that inspired you. You can also share a little about your core beliefs that guide your current impact investing, as well as to share your theory of change. And by that I mean, what is the long-term social or environmental priority that you're working towards? Annie, if you can start.
Hi, thank you, Cindy. Thank you, AVPN, for inviting me, and nice to join this session. How I got started in my impact journey, I shared this in my report. There are certainly personal motivations, one of which is simply the fact that I was very blessed to have inherited a lot of resources. But along with that, I think it's a strong sense of responsibility as I started to think about how I should deploy these resources. I think, in the family office arena, people say, you ought to be a good steward of your wealth, and I kept thinking about what that meant, but also faced with the reality that there are lots of huge challenges facing humanity. I couldn't help but think that, as fortunate as I was, being a generation who had access to creature comforts, but driven by fossil fuel and a dependence on fossil fuel, we didn't experience war or conflict, but we're using up the Earth's resources. And I look at my kids. I have two now grown kids in their 20s, and I fear for their future and the kinds of things that they are going to have to face. And so I decided to find ways to actually deploy my assets for good, if I can, or at least to do less harm. In terms of what people or events inspired me, I think in terms of people, there are just too many to count. And certainly the founders of Toniic, Lisa and Charlie Kleisner, were my heroes when I first started looking into this space. And they were always several steps ahead in terms of not only pushing for impact investing as an asset class. They explained that this is really a lens and approach that you can take across your entire portfolio, no matter what asset class you're invested in. And they created this group of 100% network investors in this network who are really asking themselves deeper and deeper questions about what being an impact investor and what aligning your values with your investments really mean. But I think the main idea that really motivated me to go all in, if you will, was Jed Emerson's blended value concept. I think that really was the proverbial kind of light bulb, which helped me see that any investment actually generates impact, or my preferred word is actually consequence. There's good consequence, there's bad consequence. We don't always see every consequence. And I think the challenge of being an impact investor or sustainable investor is to see as clearly those impact or those consequences as much as possible, so that you can take all of these factors holistically before you decide whether an investment is worth doing. Not only that, but you also consider kind of your personal goals, what motivates you, your need for financial return. Is this investment actually adding something to the world, to solutions? So I think that there are just countless things that kind of motivated me to do this. But there's a lot of learning, I can only say, on this journey as I kind of engaged more in the practice. Do you want me to also address kind of the long-term goal at this point, or should I hand over to Doug?
Yeah, if you can just briefly mention currently what is the primary social and environmental goal that your family office is focused on.
Sure. Okay. So I think when we put out a report, we didn't have a thematic. I think I was very keen on just promoting the idea of sustainable finance and trying to get more people interested in it. After the report, I think we are focusing a lot more on climate change. And it's not simply investing for solutions. I think it is taking a deeper look at whether our portfolio is adding to the problem, or are we, how much of it is actually helping either in terms of mitigation or adaptation. But it's very difficult when you have a portfolio that comprises funds, different asset classes. How do you kind of get through to all that? We're still in the middle of this exercise of trying to take a look at our portfolio and to what extent is it aligned with a 1 degree or 1.5 degree temperature change or 2 degree scenario. It turns out to be a very complicated exercise, but I think in the process, though, it helps us also look at what more can we do. So one example is we're even looking at our cash. We have obviously liquidity needs, so we have cash, and we're asking our banks to try to avoid placing money with banks that finance a lot of fossil fuel exploration and extraction. So that's how we're trying to deepen kind of our climate change lens across our portfolio.
Great, thank you, Annie. Doug, just as a quick refresher, basically, if you can just introduce yourself to the audience by sharing how you got started on your impact journey, your core values and beliefs around that influence your current investing, and then your theory of change, the long-term social or environmental goal that you're working towards. Hey, Doug, we're having a tough time hearing you.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, somewhat better.
Great, thank you. So my pleasure to join the session, and I have been the so-called impact community now for years now, but I think it's easier to explain why I believe in impact investing now through the my longer.
Hey, Doug, if you have a mic, can you hold it closer because you are fading in and out?
What about this? better?
A little bit. Let's hopefully it holds up.
Okay, let me speak up. So hopefully it's better. No?
No, it's quite muffled.
No? Can you hear me? No?
Can you hold the mic maybe closer to your mouth?
What about this?
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Like it better? Sorry about that. So I have been the impact investing journey for 10 years now, but actually the roots, the reason I think I have been the impact investing easier to explain my longer life. So, so I was born from middle low class in Korea. So our family was poor, but luckily so I was able to go to college. Actually, the first family member go to college. Then I started working in the financial sector, the financial analysis. And then studying more advanced finance course in the UK and back to Korea, working investment banking side, and then moved to the e-commerce company. Then as a CFO, I started the company and we went public in NASDAQ. So sort of I actually achieved sort of a career building up the latest some achievements. And then actually I made some, or the company was sold to eBay, made some assets which gave me some sort of kind of freedom. Then I studied what I can do. So while I have been going through all the different the careers experience, and then well, first thing came to me is that appreciation of entrepreneurship. So I really appreciated the power of entrepreneurship to change the status quo. So, and also another thing is that I have come across that some pioneers of impact investors, particularly the members of the Toniic. Then actually we moved to, our family moved to Silicon Valley, the Bay Area. But actually I worked more in person, the family members, including Charlie and the Lisa Klausners. They joined the members returning from 2012.
Doug, Doug, I'm sorry to interrupt. Actually, the sound quality is very poor. I'm going to ask Annie a question, and maybe in the meantime, you can try using the computer mic instead of the headset. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to hear you.
Okay. In the meantime,
yeah, about the interruption. So the next question, Annie, I have for you is basically talking about results, right? I mean, after all, this is impact investments. How would you describe the results of your portfolio to date, both impact as well as financial? I'll start from there.
So we take a very holistic view of our portfolio. Obviously, we do check in. So I have a director of investments who helped me do that. We invest, up until now, we invest mostly through funds. We have relatively few direct deals, which is, I think some impact investors usually find that unusual because a lot of times they like to be very close to the impact. They want to see it, feel it, understand it. But when I first started, and also, I'm not a professional investor myself, and given the situation where we started, we also wanted to do field building, and we felt that by using fund managers, it's actually a way to aggregate. It's a way to through our fund managers to reach actually a wider group of impact companies. So in terms of return, I think it's fair to say that it's generally met our targets and expectations. We don't, within our team, actually talk about market returns. We do use benchmarks for all the different asset classes to see how we're doing, and I'd say that in general we've been more than happy. Of course, there are going to be some better performing ones, financially speaking, than others. But we try to, for every investment, we try to understand where the impact theory is, whether the manager is staying true to their strategy, and we also try to learn from the process. Every quarter we have updates, and annually we do a very in-depth review with each of our fund managers, so that they know that we are serious about the impact side of things as well. And I would say that they've always appreciated our engagement because that's the reason why they're in the impact space to start with. I think we have actually now kind of moved on, as I mentioned earlier, to a different phase because of our concern about climate change. I think we're taking an even closer look at screening our existing investments. I mean, we've already adopted a divest policy since 2013. We have very little exposure to coal, oil, gas exploration and production. And we've reinvested some of the proceeds that we had from the divestment to impact funds in areas such as energy efficiency, renewable energy, etc. But now we are thinking that simply using investments is not enough. We want to activate more of our philanthropic resources to do more in the climate change field, but focusing on nature-based solutions. I talked about the importance of kind of field building as well, and what we try to do is to see how our limited capital can intervene at a point that catalyzes, hopefully, other sources of capital from more mainstream or maybe more risk-averse investors as well. So it's a little too complicated for me to kind of talk through all of it now, but maybe later on in the discussion, if there's time, I'd love to get more into to some of our initiatives.
Right. Well, going back to the point around the returns, and I'd love to hear how you think about balancing between financial returns and social impact. But would you say then your target financially is the benchmark against which you're investing, whether if it's, say, public equities for your impact for your portfolio?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, we do set an internal financial return target. And the way we establish that target is to look at our needs and our expenses. So up until recently, you know, we have been able to make that target. In other words, the return enables us to cover our philanthropic budget. It allows me to have a team that supports us, you know, in all aspects of our work. And of course, you know, there are the usual expenses as well as meeting my personal living needs as well. So I've been very happy with the way that my portfolio has performed. It's just that now we're moving to another phase where we're carving out a portion to devote to the climate change cause.
Great, thanks, Annie. Doug, I see you're back
Hi.
online.
Yeah, I changed my device. Is it better?
Much better, yes.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, great to have you back. If you can quickly catch up and share about D3, if you want to start from the top, but just maybe do a little bit of a summary.
Okay.
What you already
So I moved to the Bay Area in 2012 after some exits in Korea and became the member of Toniic from 2012. Then inspired by classmates as a member of Toniic, including Lisa and Charlie Kleisner's. And also thought leader in the sector like Jeff Emerson. And then I started to joining the syndication investing, some other emerging markets. That's how I started impact investing. And then after spending 5 years in the Bay Area and moved back to my home country 2017. And then I put together with other asset owners, successful entrepreneurs, and to run the impact venture capital. So now we run two impact venture funds. So that's where I am. So key areas while we are investing across the UN SDG 17 goals, but we have about the 3 areas, focus area. One is that we call the reha care, rehabilitation and care business, particularly the service for disadvantaged and also essential workers, like service provider for nursing homes, kind of. That's one part. Second part is that we focus on the business of making our cities better, inclusive, and safe. So including affordable housing and renewable energy part, or so-called impact or fintech, financial inclusion area. Lastly, the third part is environmental impact area, such as the circular economy and the renewable energy part. So 3 areas we focus on. The key value I have is that to challenge the dominant assumption, the underlying of our economy or finance, which is only serving for the financial return. Well, I have been all the financial sector, after the college, about 20, 30 years. But I think it's only, I mean, the scheme only captures the finance only, which is not, I thought it's incomplete. The financial value and some other social, the environmental value is separate in dichotomy concepts. So I think I mean, just think that I think we need a more holistic approach. So which is I think it's kind of embracing the impact investing concept. So is this an answer to your question?
Yes, Doug. Well, we we were able to hear about 2/3 of it. I think there's a certain angle. I'll cue you up next time to not move your head when you're in the perfect position. So a question probably on a lot of people's minds is around, that seems better, Doug, actually. So as a follow-up question that I asked, a similar question to Annie, Doug, is around returns expectations. So you run a VC fund. What are the returns expectations of your LPs? Are they the same as other VC funds?
Yeah, sure. So can you hear me now? I pulled up my earphone.
Yeah, it's much better. Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, great. Well, I mean, sweet spot our investment as a VC firm, of course, that we call the high impact and the high growth area. But sometimes we actually we invest in it's lower than the market financial return expectation, but it's very socially meaningful. So we call it impact first category areas. So that overall we actually because we mix some part of the impact first investment in our whole portfolios, which will lower the overall return. So most of the commercial VC target like at least 15% or 20% IRR. So we target gross IRR like 10%, which is still quite challenge. It depending on how much you mix the impact first. But I think that this 10%. The expectation is still, I think, it's a good return for, we think that for a group of investors, either their impact or not, I think I believe that we have quite a good deal of investors, even though they are not the impact investors, and I think they are conscious of the social values, environmental values. So that I think that's why we target about 10%. But net of this, that's a gross IRR target. But net of the fees, it will be dropped down about like a 7 or 8% the return, which is lower than actually the commercial VC's target. But we believe that it's good enough for a certain group of investors.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Well, a question on everyone's mind, of course, is around COVID-19 and the impact it's had both on your portfolios as well as your investment strategies. So has anything changed post-COVID? Or I guess we're still in the middle of COVID. Annie,
sure.
do you
so we are still in the middle of COVID.
All right, Annie, do you want to start? I think you need to unmute your microphone.
Yeah. Sorry. No, it's unmuted.
Yes, there was just a slight lag. Go ahead.
Okay, all right, sorry. Yes, so we're still in COVID. We're still seeing a lot of volatility. But during the first quarter, when things were looking pretty bad, we were actually very happy to see. We have two bank ESG mandates with banks, and we just saw that in those two accounts that the performance was really outperformed, the benchmarks that we use quite meaningfully by about 3%. And we asked ourselves, where did that come from? And our conclusion is that both mandates use a best-in-class approach. So we were already targeting companies that were leaders in their field. We had a total exclusion on fossil fuel. So if you remember, oil price dropped precipitously, for a while. We had almost no exposure in that, so I think that contributed to the performance. And finally, there is a bit of an overweight on the healthcare and IT sectors because of our tilt. So I think all of these combined just made them outperform benchmarks quite significantly. So we were very happy about that. I think I have seen articles and literature out there where other people have had the same experience when they looked at ESG strategies as well. So for other asset classes, I think microfinance had been a bit hard hit for understandable reasons. But we're long-term investors, so we're waiting it out like everybody else.
Great, thanks, Annie. I think, your experience, as you mentioned, holds true, at least anecdotally. It's still too early to tell among a lot of other impact investors who have kind of, with their investing with an ESG lens has actually proved to be financially outperform traditional investments. Doug, what about you? Has the pandemic kind of affected your investment strategy and how you look at investing in different industries?
Sure. The pandemic actually inspires me a lot from my portfolio companies there. For example, well, most of the social ventures I invested, actually many of them actually had developed the solutions or services for the people who are disadvantaged. I mean, or where a proper infrastructure is lacking. For example, a company called Enuma, they developed a tablet-based education for children, for offering the children who have a lack of schools and teachers, particularly the emerging the countries, less developed countries there. But this is the solution, the education solution for very specialized the situation there. And so it's not the mainstream, but now the COVID-19 has burst out, that all the schools, infrastructures, and closed up. I mean, the children are not allowed to go to school, but I mean, the education should continue. How? So that, I mean, this is in case of Korea, probably similar cases in other countries, that, I mean, the Ministry of Education started to call out some other ed tech companies there, right? So this is then some lot of actually the social venture, the ed tech companies actually called in. Can you help this situation? So this is very interesting to see that the social venture service initially were developed for very specialized situation or developed for the marginalized people, but now it's used for the mainstream. So I see that the very similar case in some other areas, we see that. So we see, that's why I think I started to identify opportunities born in crisis. Yeah. You know, back in 2000, back in 1930s, like 2029 or 30s, there when the economic crisis happened, that a lot of actually the industrial design and the innovations actually developed after that. So like all the mass radio, TV, I mean, a lot of actually the innovations that happened after that. So I think, we as impact investors think that in normal days, so before COVID-19, we see that situation is not just a calm and the normal situation. Even before COVID-19, as impact investors, we trying to see what's the pains of the disadvantages, some other the people on the marginalized, right? So that I think I think another example is that see that in Africa, the Sun Funder, which is providing the loan facilities for the local solar energy distributors and the installers there, right? And interestingly, I am actually one of the early equity investors, and also their loan facility investors as well. And they actually recently achieved $100 million loans deployed already. But one of the very recent deployment was that to provide a kind of a manufacturing a company in Kenya. So the factory actually received the loan facilities to install the solar energy. And then the factory actually turned the manufacturing lines, it's auto parts manufacturing lines, into the PPE, like personal protective equipment. And they started to produce some masks or some other PPEs there. So think about the unless, I mean, if there was no like a Sun Funder company there before, well, it's kind of a, you know, it's a social infrastructure, so energy access infrastructure there. So if there was no Sun Funder, it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's how the manufacturing company actually started to produce the masks there. If they have a lack of electricity, no way. So in that way, I think the impact investing is building up. It's already before COVID-19, already started to building up the essential infrastructure of the people. So another example in India, Semabo. I mean, that's a mobile clinic company. I invested like 7 years ago there. So they actually providing the telemedicine and moving around the clinics in some rural area of India. So now, I mean, COVID-19 started also hit on the ground in India. There are, you know, the portable, the clinics, actually it became like the pop-up COVID-19 testing point now. So I mean, think about India. I mean, Korea, I mean, or Hong Kong has a better hospital infrastructure already. But we invested not because, I mean, I did not invest in the Semabo because of COVID-19. Well, because we invested, well, this investment is kind of social infrastructure for the low income the people in India. So now it's becoming now. I mean, in the middle of COVID-19, it's very important, becoming very important social infrastructure there. Another example is that well, in Korea, like fintech companies, they provide they provide loans, P2P lending. The companies there, particularly they're targeting like a middle level credit rating the people there. So now they actually in contrast to the banking sector, they actually offering most of service for the high income, consumers there. But these fintech companies, because they develop the middle level interest, middle level the loan facilities, then actually it's very good for now some essential workers there. So as you know that because of the COVID-19, you know, a lot of essential workers, a lot of workers actually temporarily laid off. Furloughed, right? They're losing the jobs. But they need some emergent money. But think about, the financial sector, they have a higher barrier. The barrier to the low income families, though, right? So but that means space. Now they're filled in by some social impact fintech companies there. So that's, I think, some examples I would like to address that what impact investing is providing some social safety net and infrastructure. So now, I think we see that that's the real value now for those companies. So actually, the confirms that the direction of the impact investing, and then. To your answer your question, that of course that we actually see that the next crisis definitely, I think everybody agree that the climate change. So I think so we need to continue accelerate more the impact capital. To prevent the bigger crisis there. So my next the fund. I actually when I started impact investing, so I'm pretty much focusing on the inequality side as well. But actually now the balancing with the more also the climate change issue as well. So that's it.
Great, thanks, Doug. I think you make a good point about actually social enterprises, or not even necessarily what we term social enterprises, but those companies that impact investors invest into are uniquely in a good position to actually address some of the biggest challenges that we're facing in our time, COVID being the current one and climate being the one of the century. We are actually running out of time, so we have just enough time. We were actually already in the process of answering some of the questions from the audience. There is one specifically here for Annie. You mentioned investing in nature-based solutions. Are there any specific solutions you find particularly promising for mitigating or adapting to climate change?
I know we're running short on time, so just to make it really quick, we wanted to focus on Asia. We were finding it difficult to find either investable opportunities. So we ended up partnering with an organization called Convergence to seed some projects that can turn into blended finance vehicles. So please go to the Convergence website if you're interested in that. We're continuing to explore other opportunities in that space. But we do find that there are relatively few opportunities in or pipeline in Asia. So maybe what needs to happen is for people to help build the pipeline by seeding NGOs who will come up with hopefully some of these ideas, and then incubating these projects so that they can move kind of up the curve eventually and tap into larger blended pools of finance.
Great. Thank you, Annie. I think in the interest of time, we will move just to any final statements, very brief, and then we have a poll for everybody. Maybe we'll wait for the answers to the poll first. So the poll reads, I think everyone can see it. What is your key takeaway from the session today? What advice from speakers would you want to take forward in your work? So this is we have focus on climate change. Doug's take on social infrastructure for marginalized, helping that go mainstream. One comment here is about considering engaging with fund managers as a way to extend impact to a wider range of companies beyond just direct impact projects. I think that's basically agreeing with Annie's opening statement. So while we continue with the final statements from the audience, Annie, would you like to make any closing statement around advice for people who are still earlier in their impact journey than yours? What would you advise? Any lessons learned?
I think it is important to find your community to do this with. When I started, it was quite lonely out in Asia, and that's why I became a Toniic member early. But given the time difference and the physical distance, it was still, a bit of a challenge. So I'm glad to see that there are budding communities across Asia. AVPN and Toniic are providing support for these groups and bringing groups together. We in Hong Kong, we incubated a platform called the Sustainable Finance Initiative, which also is growing its investor community. And I would also hope that people who are getting onto this journey, when you can, please help build the field and support others along the journey who are at an even earlier stage than you are, because that's the only way that we can grow this field.
Great, thanks, Annie. Doug, any final last words?
Sure. Yeah, well, first of all, I'm very sorry for the technical glitch there. What the last the words I would like to leave is that I would like to have a quote from the impressionist, the painter Paul Gauguin. He said, "I shut my eyes to see." I think the COVID-19 stopped everything, put everything on hold to see the people and our nature, which have not been seen in normal times there. So I think we are forced to stop and we close and think about think of what really we use our resources properly, and are we really measuring what really matter? I think the impact investors is even before the COVID-19. I think is trying to encapsulate the real value in our the financial resources and or other resources there. So here in Asia, as Kenny said, I think we are smaller number of the Toniic members compared with the Europe and the US, but we have actually quite the pioneers here, and particularly Cindy is leading the Toniic community and the AVPN, the wider network. I think it's Asia is important. This is a very big, the biggest in the geography, and I think it's time to change. Thank you.
Great, thank you, both of you. And I'll turn over the mic to our AVPN hosts. Thank you all for lasting through the last session and also through some sound technical difficulties. I believe there's also a resources site that you can click on where we've listed a lot of different places where you can get more information and free resources around impact investing.
Thank you, Cindy. Annie and Doug, absolutely you're right, Doug. Sometimes you need to close your eyes to see. That was a very informative and insightful panel. We've now come to the end of Investing for Impact across your portfolio. The session was made possible with the kind support of our lead partners, Chandler Foundation, Stockholm Environment Institute, and Yidan Prize Foundation, and our knowledge partner, Standard Chartered Private Bank. We would also like you to explore our new prototype online learning platform, the AVPN Academy, at academy.avpn.asia. We would love to hear your feedback on how we can make use of this platform and enhance your learning journey. We're also happy to explore collaboration opportunities to create new courses and content for the AVPN community. Next month, we will be hosting a webinar for family offices from one of our AVPN members, Australian Communities Foundation and Bright Light Impact Advisory, on how to align investment and grant decisions to amplify impact. You can also find the details of the webinar by clicking on the events page in the link sharing pod. To continue chatting with your speakers and fellow delegates at this session, please make use of the AVPN connector. The link may be found in the chat room. Do share your highlights of this session on social media, and remember to tag us using the hashtag AVPN2020. Finally, please join us for the next session, the final session of the entire week. It's What's Next? An Action Plan Towards a Resilient Asia with Vice Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy of Indonesia. Thank you everyone for joining in.